Yeah, well, I'm John Denton, a member of the Auckland Meccano Guild. I joined somewhere around about 10, 12 years ago when I retired, and I really hadn't done much with Meccano up till that time. But, you know, I did get a number 10 set, which is this one here. Which is the aspirations of most Meccano men, the number 10 set being the largest one that was available throughout the history of Meccano. And most of my Meccano started its life, with me anyway, as Meccano which I've reconditioned invariably. One or two of the models are made with Meccano as I found it, like this little showman's engine, which is a copy of Holliday's showman's traction engine, which was the winner at the Model Engineer exhibition in 1970. And it was interesting was that this was one of the early models that I made on retirement. And I'd been waiting to find some bits and pieces of gearing and parts, which I found in a second-hand shop in Panmure, a local second-hand store. And of course I was able to build that then. This one was produced from photographs of a Manx Norton motorcycle, which was winner at the Isle of Man TT. That's really one of my favourite models. This one is Roland Emmett's Nellie, based on his cartoons. Yeah, when I first did it, it worked perfectly, but it has survived for quite a few exhibitions now, and I think it's been subject to a little bit of wear and tear in the gearing and whatnot. Yeah, this one, I rather like to make models which look correct so far as the appearance is concerned. Meccano in its early days was just built of strips with lots of fresh air between, cordage put across to give the effect of a solid surface, but this is a model of an actual locomotive on the Taffrail colliery. This is around the world a concept from the Constructor Quarterly, which was a magazine produced by the Sheffield Meccano Club in England and is now sold worldwide as Constructor Quarterly. This one is a model of me done by my son. This one is a model by Concolly, who is a foreigner. It was produced from photographs, and it is a Clockwork run model. This one is, well, everyone knows what the Spitfire looks like with its oval-shaped wings, etc. This one was running. There we are.
What are the sort of things that stop them running? Is it just sort of old age or what?
Oh, yes, well, you know, this one has been to numerous shows, and the track is getting a little bit wobbly occasionally, and it does tend to stick. If you get a loose nut and bolt, it will catch on a bolt, and until you actually see, you know, you can run the batteries down, because this is a battery-driven effort. This one is interesting in as far as the introduction of memory parts, so-called, by Meccano, simply because they were made of extremely thin, high tensile material which you could bend into all sorts of configurations, and that would actually spring back into position. So that was an innovation by Meccano. A mini block setter crane, constructor quarterly magazine design again. This is interesting. This elephant was produced when Meccano was taken over by the Japanese firm, who now don't actually control Meccano. It's back in the hands of Meccano True in Cali. This Morgan three-wheeler was one of the first models that I built on retirement. My own idea, it wasn't to a design of any particular type at all. This little saw bench is an item that was made by Meccano in the early days, 20s, and it did actually cut. It has a very, very sharp blade, and it didn't last very long before it was withdrawn as being a bit of a menace to children. This one is an interesting one in as far as it is a model of an engine which actually exists in the Science Museum in London. And it is a rocking cylinder engine which was a way of overcoming various mechanical effects which were covered by patents of the various people who made engines, and there are all sorts of devious ways of getting round valve operations and such like. These three models are in unrestored nickel plated Meccano, which was introduced originally when Meccano was first, when the idea of Meccano was first introduced back in the early 1900s. It's been made entirely in unrestored Meccano. So this has survived from around about 1907. This is what I call a twin rocking cylinder engine, and it just shows some of the mechanisms that were peculiar to types of engines which were introduced over the years, which shows the twin rocking cylinders, the actual valve control mechanisms by way of this rotating device with the balls which actually expand and control the input of the steam, and this one is the oil pump, etc.
Yes, I'm David Wall, the founder of the Auckland Meccano Guild. This is the largest model I've built for some years, a Mississippi paddle steamer, built from those plans there. It's proved quite a popular exhibition model. There's this model. This was also scratch built. A bit of imagination there. It's a privateer. Quite a bit of fun building that. That's what they call scratch built. This model, on the other hand, is from specially prepared British model plans. It's a mechanical arm. Does all sorts of things. Here we have a Nuremberg clock, just with a single hand as they had in those days. That's Clockwork, and that was built from plans from England. The next model is an electric clock. It's a synchronous clock, works on alternating current, and is reasonably accurate. My next model is, I call it the Fox and Fire. We were on holiday in Foxton a couple of years ago, and we found this little vehicle. It's the first little locomotive that ran from Foxton to Wanganui on wooden railway track, and it's scuttles along quite satisfactorily. This locomotive also runs on the same track. It's a 6-coupled radial tank engine of a British design. Again, that's scratch built. And this is the jibing jumbo. Originally it's out of a kit and it used to walk along, but you had great difficulty keeping up with it. It invariably fell off the end of a table. So I've mounted it on so it can do its tricks stationary. This little model is also electric. That was made from electricate parts, a French offshoot of Meccano, and I must say extremely successful. And here we have what I've called dignity and impertinence, the magnificent Concorde aircraft compared to a tiny Marcolite. And my last model is a mechanograph, which is really a very old model, probably about 50 years old, the design. This had 1 or 2 improvements that were developed by a Dutch chap. These are the sorts of things it's capable of doing. It's a great favourite with children.
So tell us why you got into Meccano.
Well, the first time, I suppose, a generous grandfather gave me some Meccano before the Second World War. That ended up in a sandpit, as Meccano usually does. And then I started university rather late in life, and I'm not a very good student, and I wanted something tactile. And I went back to Meccano, and I've been at it now, I suppose, for 40 years. Well, we have 3 awards that will be presented tonight. This is the Bruce Baxter Memorial Trophy. Bruce was from Wanganui originally and was a very, very knowledgeable Meccano man. And this was prepared in memory of him. And it will be voted for by the exhibitors. This is one of the most important trophies of all. This is for the senior modeller. And it will also be presented. We will all have the opportunity to vote on the models that we like, what we think are best, and the winner will be presented with this, which is kept for 2 years until the next convention. This is the club trophy, and it is presented to the club that accrues the most points. As you can see, it's had quite a long history. I do hope the Auckland Guild manages to secure it tonight.
I'm John Freer, I'm from Taranaki, and I'm a member of the Manawatu, Wanganui and Taranaki Meccano Club. I've got 2 models on exhibition. Both models are steam engines, and they're different from most models of steam engines. The drives that make them go are hidden. Most of the drives on most models have a chain or a belt or a gear drive driving the crankshaft. With my models, the drive comes from other sources. Now, the model that is being filmed at present has a horizontal drive buried in the belly of the machine, which drives the piston, which in turn drives the crankshaft, and from there the motion goes to the other parts of the machine. With this model, the drive is hidden again under the machine, but has a small rubber pulley driving this flywheel, and that causes the machine to go through its motions. Both machines have been conceived in my mind, and I don't build with plans. In my models, as many parts as I can are genuine Meccano from varying eras, from far back as the 1950s, right through to today's sets, which is noticeable with the plastic collars that They're in the model, and the same with the pump construction here. But to supplement those parts, I use any other manufacturer of Meccano type material, and a lot of parts that I use have been made by manufacturers who replicate Meccano. And some parts are made locally here in New Zealand.
You make any yourself?
No, I don't. I don't happen to have the machine tools to make the parts. So I'm solely buy them rather than manufacture. It can be an expensive hobby, but it's a hobby that the parts will last for 100 years plus. And the medium of Meccano has been going for over 110 years now.
I'm Neil Carey, been a member for the Meccano Guild for nearly 30 years now. I've built this model locomotive of the New Zealand Railways WW class locomotive. The loco was purchased by the Glenbrook Vintage Railway in 1970 for its railway out at Glenbrook. I have a personal interest in the locomotive. I fired the locomotive with another crew in relays from Wellington to Auckland on its delivery trip from Greymouth back in 1970. The model was built from just a basic plan using a scale ruler to get the right scale in conjunction with the half-inch hole spacing of Meccano parts. Over the years, I've built several locomotives. Being a retired engine driver from New Zealand Railways, trains have always been my interest. So yeah, I've built several Meccano locomotives. New Zealand Railways KA class. Back in 1993, I built a model of the Union Pacific Challenger, number 3985, which is still operating in the US to this day.
My name's Gary Higgins. I've been a member of the Auckland Meccano Guild for about 15 or so years. I did leave and I rejoined at some stage in the past. There are two sections to the Meccano hobby. There's the collecting of the actual sets as they were when they were first produced, and there's the building things with those sets. And here we have an example of some of the collectible sets, starting off with this set, which is a 3X set, introduced in about 1919. Very early set. It came with a motor, one of the first electric motors that was put out. And at this stage, Meccano was being produced in the United States as well as in the UK. And this set comes from the United States. Quite, as I said, quite an early set. Then we'll come to this set, which is about 1922. You can tell that by the little 22A on the books. The books are a very good indication as to the years of the sets. And all the way along, Meccano were trying to make the sets interesting to people by having these rather lovely lithos of little boys playing with the sets on the covers. No little girls, just little boys.
And now they're big boys.
And now they're big boys, yeah, that's exactly right, yes. Here we went to a dramatic change in Meccano, where it went from being basically nickel plated and brass to colour. Colour was a big move, and they put the new Meccano all enamelled in here, as you can see. This is to make quite a statement to people that here we are, we've got something completely new, something bright, something everybody will like, and Meccano haven't looked back since. They've gone for every colour under the sun, from this original red and green right through to the kaleidoscope of colours we see today.
And I see the price went up from 1 shilling to 1 and sixpence.
It did indeed, yes. So you can see that on there, 1 shilling to 1 and sixpence. And the same sets today would probably be about $50 to $60 if we're looking, say, at a number 1 set or even more. So yes, they have increased in price. This was an interesting year. This was 26 when the colour replaced the nickel. And this set is part nickel, part colour, as you can see. And so this is a number 5 set. The only bigger set than this was a number 6 set at the time, and this was a humongous set, a very big set. So you can build just about anything with this type of set. Beside this, we have a collection of Meccano magazines. They themselves are being collectible. They started about 1920, well, I think 16. It might have been 16 when they first came out. And they were just a single printed sheet when Frank Hornby first put them out. And they grew and grew and grew and grew right through until about the 80s when they gradually met their own demise. People weren't buying as much Meccano, weren't building with it as much. These sets will build from a 4 to a 5 and from a 3 to a 4. So if you had a 3 set, you'd buy a 3A set and immediately you'd have a 4 set. Again, Meccano haven't done that anymore. That's part of the past era of Meccano. We went from the 50s into the early 60s, 61, 62. This is the type of set that was coming out. This is called the light red and green period. Before that we had the dark red and green period. It may not look a lot different, but it is. This is sort of an orangey colour. This is more of a red colour. And then Meccano decided to go to more engineering type colours, black and a sort of a burnt orange or yellow, and so these colours became predominant probably about the early 70s. So that was for about 5 or 6 years. They retained those colours, all the different sets. This is number 7, which is rather a big set, and they also named them like Mountain Engineers set or Airport set or Seaport sets. They tried to go as themed sets rather than different sets for different building purposes. Then Meccano decided to go for the multi-sex look. Rather than sticking to just toys for boys, they thought they'd include girls on the covers in the hope that that would get some of the fairer sex to take up Meccano collecting. I don't think it was that successful, but the sets remained basically similar, although we went to blue and this mustard yellow and zinc. Zinc was the colour of the finish on them. And then following that we went to about 84, 85 into this colour. And this is the same, as you see, the same sets, but they changed the box back to showing pictures of the actual models you could make on them. And that carried on right through until the modern sets, when they just went for every single colour you could imagine under the sun, and there were different sets for different types, specialist sets, non-specialist sets, and probably one of the more interesting ones is this set, which built a large Meccano crane, a block setting crane. In about the same time as Meccano was being put out by Frank Hornby in England, there was another enterprising fellow called Gilbert in the USA, and he decided, well, if Frank can do it, I can do it. And he started putting out what was his building construction systems. He called it a rector. Okay, and so these models here that you see here, these are some early examples of a rector. This truck is called the white truck, and it was about 1920s to 1930s when it first came out. One of the very first truck models to be put out, and most Americans would recognise that instantly as a white truck model. Next we have an excavator. The excavator bucket was very similar to the Meccano bucket of the same vintage, and that used gears and various things to run it as well, as you can see there. I have substituted some Meccano parts for it, but the original motor is still in here, and yeah, it's quite an interesting model. The next one is some of the later erectors. This is about the 1940s, 1950s erector, which a lot of the people of our age would have grown up with in the States. And here's two of the sets that come from that period. This is a 1949 number 9.5 set. The biggest set was a 12.5, and this is a about a 1950s to 53, around about that. It's 50s anyway, 8.5 set. This made the Ferris wheel, which is shown on the box, and this other big pumping engine here. Gilbert was very similar to Meccano in that he liked bright lithos and bright colours and thought that people would buy them if they had those types of things in the adverts. The next step down we come to an English manufacturer, and this is called Primus Engineering. The Primus Engineering was put out by a firm in about the 1920s, 1930s, and the firm was called Butcher and Company. Now they used to make cameras, and they still do, I think, very good cameras, but they went sideways and made this metal construction system, but they use wood. And so you see here you have a railway carriage made of wood, you had the train, you had a car construction set, which you could build up to make different car chassis, and you had a clockwork motor. Very similar to Meccano, but different. And then moving on from there, we come back to some more real Meccano, as we call it. This is a mechanical workshop set which came out in about the 1990s, 2000. Fairly modern set, and it gave you the opportunity to make a working gearbox for a car, and a number of other models. Quite clever. These sets here are mainly remote control sets. They will work by a remote control starter, and they'll run around the floor, do various things. Some of these smaller sets were made just for children to play with, and they will just roll on the floor. Later on, they brought in some sets which had pull back and go motion, like some of the children's toys you've seen about today. These also are remote controls. This is another remote control here. We can run the wheels on this so you can get some idea. I won't put it on the floor because it'll disappear. We have steering on the front. This one will also hook into your iPod and play various bits of music through it. These sets here were some of the very latest Meccano sets. I've sort of put them to the back. This one here goes about as far away from Meccano as you can get. Mainly a plastic body, a little bit of Meccano, bolt together systems, and it's based on the Gears of War computer game series. So it's all fantasy stuff made for kids to be attracted to. They brought out this series which was really unusual. This is called the Time washing machine, complete with what's called a rabbit, which flies around inside it, and you can see it washes. It's like a spin dryer, if you like. And this one is a racing toilet of all things. Now, where else would you find a racing toilet? And it's a pull and go motion as well. So if we carry on further down, we have the Tintin series. Meccano took on board the Tintin series and the film, and they made special models up for it. They made this seaplane, they made a small red Jeep, which I haven't got here, which there's a photograph there, and they made the rather nice Unicorn, which is the Tintin sailing ship. On the website at the time, I saw another aircraft they were designing but they didn't make, and that was this one. So I thought, well, I make it, so I did. And then there was a Tintin submarine, of course, which everyone that's read the Tintin books would know. So I built one of those. This is a shark submarine, made to look like a shark. And yeah, so that's basically what that represents. In about the time that boys in the UK were buying Eagle comics, a set came out called the Dan Dare Spaceship Builder set, about 1950s. And here's a couple of examples of models that are made up with that set. And as you can see, they were the Dan Dare comics were being run as a strip in the Eagle comics, and so the adverts came out at the same time, and I believe this was quite a good seller. Now, both of these sets were found in New Zealand, and so they obviously were widespread. They went from here through the UK out to the colonies. Everyone was happy with them. The next thing we have, which is a Meccano little whimsy of my own, is based on a model by a guy called De Villiers. And he, in about probably the 17th or 16th century, I think, he invented this perpetual motion machine. He had hammers flying around on the end of shafts, and he thought by running them round, he would be able to create perpetual motion. I've, of course, achieved that with a rubber band on the back, but the concept is there. The weights push down, they push the flywheel round and round and round. Something a little bit different.
My name is Malcolm Booker from Sydney, Australia. I brought a little vertical steam engine. It was an experimental one, and the mechanism is such that it does not need a crank, and it got over the problem of having the patent on the crank. This little model will run all day, and it'll run all day tomorrow. The motor's only got very light duty, and I've had it at an exhibition in Melbourne. I've had it at an exhibition in Sydney, and I've had it for a few years, and it works silently and without falter, and I'm very happy with it, and it's a model that I can be confident with to take anywhere.
And how long has it been running?
I started it at 9 o'clock this morning, and I'll turn it off when the exhibition closes tonight, and I'll turn it on tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock and turn it off when it finishes it tomorrow afternoon.
Okay. When did you build it?
I'm not sure, but about 10 years ago.
A convention is never a convention without the pieces that go on behind the scenes, and of course here's a good layout of all the parts that the people have out for silent auction, which will be auctioned by the end of today. So there's been a great deal of activity up here, There's all sorts of parts from very, very many ages, starting way back probably in the early 20s, of 1920s. So it's all here for the taking or the asking or the inviting. And there are some special sets over towards the rear on the next table over, which will indicate how far back and just what the extent of Meccano was. Hornby was a man who had a wish to teach people, and he didn't just limit it to Meccano and Hornby, but to a wide range of other goods and toys and things that he thought that young people ought to know in the past. He was possibly, as a person similar in nature to Baden-Powell, who obviously set up scouts right through the world and continues to this day with disciplines. But Hornby had a great thirst and a wish to teach all young minds going forward. He spent time actually building sets and producing sets for the royal families over the years, and so there has been a wealth of information and knowledge for us to research. The anthology is just amazing. If anybody wants to know more information, they should just look up on the web. There are so many websites that will take you to give you a lot of input as to what has happened over the years. This is a real treasure trove. So you see people up here fingering their way through this, and at this point I know one of our modelers has really got his eye on it because he's seen a number of parts that he's been looking for years in there. So it has suddenly jumped from the quote here of $125, the next bid is $265 for that little box of bits. And I'm sure before the day goes that will have reached a much higher figure than that.
Well, I'm Les Meggett from Auckland. I got my first Meccano set when I was 60 years ago. It was a number 6 set, which I've still got the bits of. But like most Meccano men, I got out of the hobby when I was a teenager and only got back into it about a decade ago. And was lucky enough to have a bit more funds at the time to buy more parts. So I finally got the ultimate of having a set 10, which I'd always wanted to have since I was a boy, of course, like most of us. My real passion is cranes. And I've been making cranes, bigger and bigger cranes for the last decade or so. Now this is a Liebherr crane made in Germany. The prototype is it's a city compact crane. Its main difference from most mobile cranes is that the cab, it does two jobs. It sits on the front of the carrier, and the steering's attached to the steering wheel, and therefore it can drive away, so all this drops down and sits on, and so that's the steering going on there. So it's power steering. And of course, when it wants to act as a crane, the whole cab can be lifted and extended when I hit the right button. Bolts. As well as change the angle of the cab so the driver can see what he's up to.
And how many motors you got on this?
16 motors, so of course there's a lot of, all 6 axles drive, 6-speed gearbox. So there's 4 differentials. The whole crane, I added up how many gears there were, there's about 95 gears in the whole model. So all the stabilisers extend electrically and go up and down. And the jib, of course. Biggest problem is to get this crane to luff using stainless steel cables, because this Meccano doesn't have any hydraulics. I should turn that off. So there's a very meaty 24-volt motor in there to do the luffing of the crane. It goes up to about 80 degrees from the horizontal, which is the same as the prototype. That was probably the biggest challenge in this crane, is getting that to work.
Are there any parts you have to make yourself, or is it all genuine?
No,
Meccano?
it's all genuine Meccano, except the motors and the tyres, which are ashtray tyres from the, well, probably the 60s. No, I try not to make parts. It's try and keep to the system as much as possible. There's a lot of a big range of ages of parts. So some of the gears are 1920s. The yellow plates on the body are French Meccano, probably as modern as we're only 2 or 3 years old. And there's the red plates on the crane are 1960s Binns Road, Liverpool Meccano. So there's a real range of parts. These some very smart design with the actual Liebherr crane. The little ladders fold away and for easy access. It's very smart design, really. And then this equipment box lifts off on the as the real crane, so you can get it into a tighter space on the building site. Well, there'll have to be some plugs, of course, to attach the to the front headlights and things. But
so what do you do from here on? I mean, you've built this one. Are you going to build one bigger and better?
No, I don't think it's going to get any bigger. Because they're getting too heavy to carry. To get this in here, it has to be broken down into about 4 parts so that it's easily transportable. No, it won't be getting any bigger. I've got to the limit I think Meccano can cope with usually. This is actually the latest model. This is a German man truck with a pole finger knuckle crane on it, which had quite a few challenges to that because it's a fairly tight space to get these things to work, because in the prototype, of course, all these are hydraulic cylinders, and that I tried to do it by pseudo hydraulic cylinders, but the forces were too big, so that didn't work. So I was forced to go back to primeval mechanics and use block and tackle basically. Most of the mechanisms take 2 or 3 attempts before you get them to work properly, so there's a lot of dismantling and rebuilding mechanisms before they you get them to work correctly. So many wasted hours, you could almost say, in getting it to work properly. A lot of perseverance required.
But would you have it any other way?
No, I wouldn't. No, it keeps me off the streets. It's a lot of fun, really. I do swear at things at times, but when my fingers aren't skinny enough, it keeps the brain very active because you have to design everything and then try and make it work. So it's almost, well, it's mechanical, miniature mechanical engineering.
Hi, I'm Don McClelland. This is my model. This is based on the Runcorn Transporter Bridge. It was out of the number 10 1937 instruction manual. On and off, took a while to build. Biggest problem with it is to adjust the automatic reverse mechanism.
That's all genuine parts?
Yes. Yeah, it's based on the 1970s silver, yellow and blue, although my majority of parts are actually red and green. Done various models, block setting cranes, harbour crane. I've done a few locomotives, a lot from instructions, a few freelance.
Okay, so what started you off at Meccano?
Oh, father gave me a set when I was about 7 years old, back in about 1953. So I started off as a child. I gave it up in teenage eyes, and then later on took it back again as an adult.
Right, hello, I'm Mike Stewart, and I've been in Meccano since I was about 7 or 8 years old, so quite a few years now. I'm interested in making fairly mechanical sort of models. I like things with lots of gears and motors. So this is a model first designed by a guy in Italy in the 1960s and published as a plan, a model of the moment 6. It was featured in a Meccano magazine advertisement in 1967. We'll go to the end. This switch, when it touches a switch, it'll activate a motor which starts the both the trolley and the rail, moving rail. When it makes contact at the end of the rail, it will form here. When it touches this strip, same on this side, it starts another motor, which is this drive here. We can take this off and we can see the mechanism. This has been redesigned quite a bit from the original. It's a different motor. All the motors are different to the original. The original used PDU motors, so I've changed them to tape deck motors, which run much more quietly. And the gearing has needed to be changed too because of the different motors, and also slightly redesigned to remove a clutch inside this mechanism, which wasn't very satisfactory. When this moving rail comes in, it activates a switch here, and that starts a motor underneath here. This motor has stopped running. I have to remove this. This is the timing unit, if you like, down here. Yes, as this arm comes back in, you'll see this motor here activated, which is just finishing now. It reverses the current in the track, allows the train to proceed. This is a 3-speed automatic gearbox designed by a Dutch gentleman and featured in Meccano Engineer in 1976. I only had a photograph from the internet, a video of it working. So it's quite ingenious. You can put a load on the output shaft and there'll be no slippage when it changes down, because you've actually got 2 gears in mesh at the same time. At the moment, first gear is a mesh 4-to-1 drive. If I release the shaft a little bit, second gear is engaged, but you can, these two here, the 3-to-1 gear, but you can see the 4-to-1 drive is still engaged. This ratchet is freewheeling slightly to permit the 3-to-1 drive to actually take effect. And then when the shaft speeds up, top gear 2-to-1 is engaged. When I put a bit of load on the shaft, the 3-to-1 will be engaged at the same time as this, but it's the ratchet's freewheeling, and the higher ratio is the 2-to-1 is in effect. The differential here allows, when a load put on, for the lay shaft to be pulled back to a lower gear. So the speed as well as the load determines the gear.
Hi, I'm Rick Vine from the Auckland Meccano Guild, also Melbourne Meccano Club. I came back to Meccano in the early 2000s. I think like most Meccano boys, you started young and then come teenagers you move on to other things. But I came back, I heard about the Auckland Meccano Guild, and so I joined the NZFMM, get the New Zealand Meccano magazine, and one of the first models I started with was this one. It looked fairly simple, It turned out I didn't have many of the parts, so you have to go out acquiring and painting bits and pieces. I rather liked the small cars, and I saw this on the internet, so I bought a few more parts and made up the old 2CV. Following on from that, I got a bit more tricky, and I got the plans for this from the Canadian Meccano Club for a London double-decker bus. I then saw in Constructor Quarterly they had a Bugatti, a little Bugatti model, and I just thought, well, I'll change it a little bit, put red on instead of the blue, and the exhaust pipe along the side, and called it an Alpha. Also from Constructor Quarterly, probably my favourite model is the Rolls Royce, which is just rather a nice model to have. I do buy modern sets. You can see I've built the Ferris wheel. If I take a modern set, I like to do something just a little bit different, and like I've motorised that one, and the Tintin Jeep has also got a motor in it as well. I'm also a fan of Doctor Who, so I built myself a little Dalek.
That's your own design, not a model?
That's my own design, yep. For novelty purposes, I just...
One more.
My name's Bob Lack, part of the Auckland Hornby Collectors Group. What are we doing at a Meccano convention? The Hornby trains are made by the same people as Meccano, and in fact are a spin-off. The very early set, 1921, is in fact assembled with Meccano bolts, Meccano axles for wheels, and that was how the Hornby set started, as a specialised Meccano set. Then, as they developed into a line of their own, assembled in different ways and separated from Meccano. And so what we have here is a range right from the 1920s. This set would be about 1928 or so, a number 2 set. And what we have running goes from then onwards right through to the 1960s. And then the maroon locomotive there, the final pride of the Hornby line, the Princess Elizabeth.
Something about different gauges? Can you talk about different gauges?
No, what we have here is all O gauge, but there was another Hornby range called the 00, which was half the gauge of the ones we have here. I'm sorry, we don't have any of those to show you here today. That was part of the precursor of what became 00 gauge, which is still used by many people today as the basis for fine-scale model railways. Quite a rare piece here, New Zealand Railways. Hornby did export to quite a number of countries and produce engines in their own style. The one you're looking at there, though, is somebody's home-built NZ Railways one.
Yeah, I'm Brian Hickson from Pataru, and I've been modelling Meccano for around about 60 years. I got into it at an early age and I've never let it go. So this particular model here is a tethered helicopter. It was one of Simon Moody's Clockwork challenge models using a #1 Clockwork motor. The objective was to see how far you could make this helicopter travel. So wind it up. The really important bits were it had to be light, and it had to be well balanced, and it had to have sufficient diameter that you could cover a fair bit of ground with every revolution. And that's what we've achieved with this particular model.
You can talk as it goes.
Yep, she's on her way now. She's risen. Around she goes, and gradually gets faster and faster.
So what was particularly hard about this?
Well, I didn't think there was anything hard, but nobody else made one, so they changed the subject to the challenge, which was something else. I can't remember. I think it was steam traction engines ended up as the challenge that year. The truck and trailer was another of Simon's Clockwork challenges. The original model was in the Set 9 book of the 50s, and the objective was one of two things: build a model exactly according to the book in exhibition class parts, in other words nice and clean and shiny, or modify it. And there was a challenge to the modification. The truck had to be able to do a figure 8 under its own power. So that meant devise an automated steering system that would do that. So I started with the trailer, and I didn't like what was in the book, so instead of just tin wheels I put the rubber tired wheels on, and duals of course, as most modern trailers have. It's sprung both ends. It has a hand brake which is applied by lifting that lever there, and it locks against the rims. The original of course had the tin wheels and the lock plate coming in behind the rim, but you couldn't do that with the rubber tyres. To unlock the brake, pull that back again. The chassis was built differently from the model, mostly to make it look like a modern trailer chassis, and the drawbar is a great improvement over the original. The next detail, I started building the truck and realised that the truck was actually, the tray of the truck was wider than the trailer, and I thought, well, that's not the way things should be. So I modified the truck initially, narrowed the chassis and such like, and then found that because I'd narrowed the chassis, the motor would no longer fit sitting flat, so I stood it up. And that meant that I had to take a right angle drive off the motor to get to the gearbox, and also that to get to the winder here, I had to put a tilt cab on it, so it was another modification. And we'll take that off there and put the cab down again. If we tip the truck up, we can see here where the drive comes, that goes to the gearbox. The gearbox is 2 forward speeds and reverse, and the original never had a differential, so a differential has gone in there to enable the thing to turn corners. Bearing in mind, of course, a number 1 Clockwork motor is not very powerful, and you need to give it all the assistance you can. Now, the automated steering system is dependent, it's driven off the output of the gearbox, drives through that shaft there to that worm gear, across to this chain and sprocket here, and then to a long shaft that goes forward and drives at the other end of this wheel here. That continues to revolve as the vehicle moves, and the bell crank, of course, on a longer throw goes like that, left, right, left, and thus it will prescribe a figure 8. The engine brake is applied by lifting the exhaust stack. The cab is tilted, the engine is wound. There's the gear lever there, right back is second gear, first gear, neutral, and reverse is right forward. And that sticks up between the seats on the inside, as you will see, accessible to the driver. When the cab is down, the steering wheel is connected to the steering system, but I can't turn that there because there's a worm drive in the supply, the automated supply to the system. However, the motor's wound, driver's in, we drop that in, and off it goes. So that's, there are quite a lot of other minor modifications too, such as the front axle assembly with a change of pivot pin. The original Meccano system, the pivot for the axle, the kingpin is sort of half an inch away from the wheel, which means that the wheels cover a lot of ground forward aft, and it puts a lot of side load on the kingpin bearings. But because we haven't got much power to turn the steering, we've got to reduce the loads as much as possible, and thus a system where the kingpin is as close to the tyre centre line as I could get.
Hello, I'm Daryl Anderson of the MWT Club. which is Manawatu, Wanganui and Taranaki. I live in Taranaki and have been a Meccano modeller for the last 25 odd years. Made all sorts of things over the years, and this is the largest crane that I've ever made. Purely as an exhibition model. It's not based on any particular make and model or anything like that. It's just out of my head, just for entertainment. It was fun to build, fun to bring up here to Auckland, and
It's it working?
yes, okay then. It's got three motors, all powered, or three movements I should say. The slew, which is the rotation, and I just press the button there. You may have heard the beep of the radio control unit picking that up. So it's slowly slewing around at the moment, and I'll press another button which will bring the hook down. The winches and everything, it's just all out of the head, and just design it as you go. The third one is the trolley, which brings the trolley in and out. So now the trolley is coming in. Takes probably about a minute, right from one end to the other. Purposely slow, just as a crane should be. Nothing worse than a crane moving too fast to scale. These radio controlled units are new. They're really simple to use, just 4 wires. Wire for the power, 2 wires for the power and 2 wires to the motor, and they've just got a forward and reverse switch. So it's just a pure switch, there's no speed control in them. There is 10.5 kilos of counterweight on the end there to keep it in balance. But the crane is just sitting there, it's not screwed down to the floor or anything like that. All the weight is on the bearing at the top. You can see the brass rollers at the top. All the weight is on there, and the tapered guide coming down is to stop the whole thing sort of tilting, to keep it all level, because there's the movement in the Meccano parts. There's tolerances, so over that length of the jib there would be quite a wobble in it if it was just sitting on the bearing without that other support.
My name's Stan Baker. I've been a Meccano enthusiast, well, basically since I was 8 years old, but I came back to it when I was in my 40s, and have been doing it on and off ever since. I actually import all the parts that are here from India. These are replica parts, but very similar to Meccano. This is a French knitting machine. Meccano's been going about 110 years now, and there's no record of anyone having built a French knitting machine up until Easter last year, when someone in Nelson, David Couch, developed one. His one was quite complex. It had 4 motors for the 4 needles, but the idea was there, and a lot of people, including John Stark and Nelson and Graham Yost, developed it to get a much better and better running machine. Hugh Ramage in Wanganui also made a major advance in it, and my model that I've built here, which still isn't working but will be by the time the exhibition opens tomorrow, is basically a lot of enhancements of my own as well. It's jamming at the moment, but basically if it wasn't jamming, that's what the mechanism would look like with it. But by tomorrow it won't be jamming and it will be working, and it will be operating hopefully at about 15 times that speed, so it should be doing about 1,000 stitches a minute. So at that rate it would take this ball of wool about 20 minutes to turn into one long French knitting.
I'm Max George, I belong to the Wellington Meccano Club, and I've been involved since the first convention about 35 years ago. Just after I managed to pick up some Meccano from a neighbour's place, and I built up from there, and I've done quite a few models, but this is my favourite one of Little Joe and Tricky Track. The Little Joe and Tricky Track, the original design was by Dr. Keith Cameron in the United States. It was only a basic little set, but there's been an extra plan, a model plan that's been designed with a lot of these tricky bridges in mind, and it's the whole thing with different little bridges. And my grandson says bridges must have sides. The original plan didn't have those, but had to put sides on it. And he also said train tracks must have tunnels, so we've got a tunnel that we designed for it. This next bridge that's going over is an under-over bridge, which was designed by Dave Dennett in Melbourne. And coming around to a transporter bridge here, which was built from photographs from the Maylands Meccano Club over in Perth. The rocking bridge, and now through the underbridge. Coming on to our diverter, where the train's going to be diverted around the... I'll take it back.
That's all right. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Going, this is a collapsing bridge where it lifts the track up. When it comes past here, the engine catches this lever here and drops the bridge, so it collapses it for next time. And with the diverter, it comes back, so it always goes round the one way. Okay, if I just take the cover off, just the batteries and the little motor in there. You can see it, you might see it better from the back. So all that drives it along, and these new batteries I've got will last all day, and probably half of tomorrow as well.
Okay, I'm Chris Morton from the Manawatu Wanganui Taranaki Club, NWT, and I've inherited some models from some of our deceased members. And this one, the revolving motor chassis, dates back to the 1950s. It was seen by Alistair Tong in a shop window in Hara, and he remembered it, and he found after a while he could buy the pieces of which it was made up. Unfortunately, those that bought it from the shop pulled it to pieces. But by following the sun fading marks, he could build the base as it used to be. And the motor chassis itself was a bit of a difficulty. He researched around the world on the internet, and this is about as close as he can get apparently as to what it was. There's a reasonable amount of discussion went on as to whether it actually was built in the factory in England or not. Still ongoing, and the only thing that Alistair added to it was actually a seat for the driver. But it looks scruffy, and I've deliberately left it that way because that shows its patina of age, for want of a better term. Now, this is a Canadian design built by Bruce Nielsen, and when he died, much to my surprise, there it was left to me. It's magnificent for demonstrating to people the different gearings, and in fact at a vintage car show we had it at, the ladies came up and wanted to know if it had, does this thing have what you call a diff in it? And I said, yes it does. And she said, right, what's that? Because my husband's always talking about it braking, so I demonstrated the differential to her.
Okay, and?
Oh, this one's a wee bit different. This one comes from my youth, and it was in Corrigal's toy shop in New Plymouth, and I admired it as a kid. It also has still got the dust and muck of ages on it, and I used to go and see Jack Corrigal in his shop, and he and his son decided I was the only one that seemed to show interest in their model 3 stories up in the building, so when they decided to quit Meccano, they came to me. This is on behalf of Hugh Ramage, and it's a French knitting machine. People will remember
using a cotton reel as a child. Well, this thing mechanically replaces that cotton reel. It's quite ingenious. It's the sort of a thing when it becomes unravelled or whatever you call it. Hugh totally designed it, and he's in Australia, which is why yours truly has got it here. And there was actually a bit of arguing to get it out of Hugh to bring it up here to Auckland. And several of our other club members are very pleased that it is here and demonstrating Hugh's ingenuity. It's not the first knitting machine he's built. He's a sewing and knitting machine mechanic by trade, and one of the things he has built in the past is a bag sewer that actually worked and was totally out of Meccano apart from the needles and the thread that it used.
Dave Shand. This is started off as a digger with no name. I started with the track as an experiment to see how it would go, and took it along to February meeting we had at Taupo, not this one, the year before, and it was very successful. So I developed the next track and then joined them together, and then wondered, what am I going to make out of it? Whether it's going to be a bulldozer or a digger or anything. Anyway, I got onto the internet and I found a Hitachi 870, and I thought, well, the tracks look in proportion to what the unit is, and so that's what it became. And
does it go?
Yes, I can make it go. All right. Yep, we're all set to go. I haven't got very much to run. Got to watch it here.
The arm?
Yes, yeah, I can turn it round, the arm going up, and the engine going. And the bucket going. Just got to watch the rods come out. And, yeah, and rotates round. See? There's one motor up the front for the bucket. There's one for the front arm, and there's back here the main drive lifting this. I had a lot of problems. I couldn't lift it with one motor, so I actually I've got two motors underneath here, and they drive one shaft through to the front, and then from there on there's putting the screwdriver up. It's the only way I could lift the arm. I made the arm up out of about 3 times to get the weight down, because I had to reduce it, and I had to use the flexible plates, alter them round to get the weight down. I made 3 buckets before I got the bucket that would be able to be lifted, and I had to reduce the size of this and reduce the weight because it was just too heavy. Right, the engine is the Baltic tank engine, originally in one of the supermodel kits, leaflets, but they use the strips, whereas now a modern version we can use the plates, which look a little bit better. I've made it about 18 months old now, so I've had it around a while, and the driving wheels are all on roller bearings, little wee roller bearings inside the main bush. It was a very good engine to build. I recently took the whole boiler off and repainted the plates and painted the front black. not many parts that aren't Meccano. The chimney's not a Meccano part, and I think the very front plate is a little bit bigger than the Meccano one, just to fill the hole.
I'm Bob Prescott, MWT Meccano Club, and my first model is the tower crane here, which is built from a model plan and operates via a computer controlled device, and all the actions are, here's the hoist, and there's the travel, and here comes the slew. That's the tower crane. And the second one is a model of Mamma Mia that plays all the songs from the show in the order that they are in the show. And here are the 4 people involved with their names on the front. And it's controlled by one motor. Does the whole lot. It's just a CD player underneath which plays the CD. This is the endless ball chute, which is also made from a model plan by a modeller in the UK, and it's very difficult to adjust to start with, but once it gets working, it works quite well, because we've got to get the bounce right for it to go into the basket. And there is some Meccano in it, which is what the belt is here. 2 ladies' belts from the $2 shop. So the kids like it when it fails, and they can chase after the ping pong ball and put it in the basket.
Hello, I'm Lou Nichols. I'm a member of 2 Meccano clubs, Wellington and MWT. I now live in Paraparaumu on the Wellington west coast, and I tend to build not tremendously large models, but this one has given me a lot of pleasure doing the Meccano miniatures and the beam engine. Now, if I The beam engine is satisfying because it gives them quite a nice few different mechanisms. This one here on the eccentric, the governor, the crank, the beam, and the pump and the oscillating mechanism in there. I'm extremely happy with this model. I've had this built up now probably for 20 years. It gives a very nice appearance of the record, not the record breaking, but the first transatlantic flight of Colonel Lindbergh. And I like this. It's just a little whimsical model called Bookends with a little motor in it there.
What does the motor do?
Oh, it's just simply turns the propeller just to make it look a little bit real. And I've done this as an Olympic tableau. The sports we're particularly good in, the rowing and the cycling, and not too bad in athletics there. And this little model is called Balance Flying, and it gradually picks up speed as it flies along. And I would have had this built up probably more than 30 years now. So there we are, that's my offering today.
Yeah, I'm Barry Babbage, member of the Federation of Model Builders, but I'm not affiliated to any club, but end up coming to most of the conventions and thoroughly enjoy them and looking around all the various models. Now, do you want to pause here?
No, carry on, go.
Do you want me to tell you about this?
Yeah,
or
tell us all
okay.
about it.
What I'm up to here is a fairly modern type of motor chassis
but it's really just the mechanics of it. It's not so much an elegant model, and it employs some of the newer gears that are made by, what's Jeff's name? The guy who does all those brass gears and all those brass parts. And what we've got here is some model. It's front wheel drive with some, you can see those brass CV joints there. And inside there also is a very compact 3-speed and reverse gearbox. Now that gearbox there is made from his gears, which are very thin in their cross section. They're not wide and deep like the old Meccano ones, so it can become very compact. So it actually works quite well in sort of looking for applications for modern motor vehicle ideas. So that's what's happened there. So, and the idea of this freewheeling thing up here is just to, if I leave it run on its own, it flies off the bench. But if you put it there like so, and start it up, there we go there, running in the lower gear at the moment. So it's just freewheeling, you might say, on this. This tumbler here is rather interesting. It's made by a guy in Australia many years ago. And no such thing as not a non-standard Meccano part, but for the first time ever, I think I bought it in 1993, for the first time ever I've used it. So here we go here. If I pull it back here, it'll flick into the reverse gear. There's the reverse gear. And this is a fun machine. It's an idea that came up in one of the Constructor Quarterly things. And the idea is that kids, as they're going past, they look at it and you say, which way are these things turning? Are they both turning in the same direction, or are they turning in different directions? 9 times out of 10, they'll say they're turning in different directions, because at first glance it looks like it. But when you go face onto each one, like you're looking at the blue one, or you're looking at the green one at a time, they are actually rotating in the same direction. So it's just a fun machine with a bit of modern rods and lots of brass parts. It's just a bit of fun, okay? And that's about it. This is a very simple idea put together for a clutch. Meccano clutches are often quite difficult to get. The friction is not good enough and they drag and they skid. This is made with a very cheap little tie out of one of the cheap Meccano sets. And so it can make a very, very compact little clutch. Once again, just an application for motor vehicles.
Bruce Gange from Palmerston North. I belong to the MWT Meccano Club. We have here a Cuthbertson water buffalo, which is designed and built in Scotland for clearing swampland. The tractor is capable of working in 4 feet of water. It has a winch on the front to self-extract itself if it gets stuck. And there's a hydraulic ram here which lowers or raises the plough or draining device in swampland. This is a Caterpillar TD24. It's got a pipe laying crane fitted to it. It all operates. If we flick a switch on there, which it is, that'll let the crane down, the crane up. You can lower the jib, and we can also put the counterweight out. The tractor will, if wanted to, no, the tractor will, believe it or not, go there. We can steer it and take it back. London Tower Bridge, the bridge part will operate. It's made from the Landmark set. That's about the limit of that one. We have here a small tractor I designed based on the Farmall H and M series. Got steering. There is forward and reverse on it. Oh, there it is there. It's got 2 speeds. And we have the good old Farmall F20 from the 1930s. That also will go like a rocket. And we come here to the old Fordson tractor, driven with a magic motor. I don't know where the key is, that's beside the point. And this is a Fowler ploughing engine. They work in pairs with a 7-farad plough between them, balanced plough. There's that there. And you can put it into gear. And there's your steering. This is a little crane based on a dinky super toy model that you can lower the jib, raise the jib, and lower the hook from here. It's got twin beam oscillating suspension. The other one is an old D8. I'm not sure if we get this to go. No, there's a switch underneath somewhere that's not turned on. Here we are, and you can steer that. And you can lower the blade down from there. This is a international T6. It's radio control. We can make it go there, we can steer it. And we can bring it back again. And the winch can come out. This is another little model. There again, what do we got? Here we are. And we go forward and backwards. That's about it on that. It's got 2 speeds to it. And this is the grader. Well, I've really got to take the cab off to drive this. If we just pull that off there, there is power steering on there. We can make it go forward. It's got oscillating on the axles. 4-wheel drive. We can. What does that do? That's the scarifier going down. Oh, wrong one. And there's the blade rotating. I can lower the blade up and down on these.
Pretty dirty.
Okay, go.
Hi, Robin Rye, MWT Meccano Club. I'm from Eltham, Taranaki. I've made a number of things. Firstly, it's a model of a spanner, but unusually for models, it's much larger than the original thing, which there's the original there, and just a nice little piece which has taken a bit of attention. Got a army truck here, just assembled out of a fairly standard piece. You've got a major crane, a minor crane, a ramp, oxyacetylene set, winch, the crane, major crane swivels, of course. We've got stands here for the crane, which fold up out of the way. There is a motor. My major model this time is this 6-wheeler truck. It is not motorised. It's intended to be motorised, but it is not. It has sort of a standard Meccano 2 forward and 1 reverse gearbox there. The differentials, twin differentials on rocking beam. There's a rocking beam twin axle affair. Stop the rotation with the mechanism on top. Screw drive. And they work as correctly as differentials should. I also added a box to it, which just actually quite simply fits on. And that is just a step for people to access the rear, which folds up inside, shut the box, and away you go. This is a little fellow that I made many years ago, and I'm very proud of it. It's some 436 Meccano pieces in there. It's a model of a pivot steer agricultural tractor. It's not motorised, but as I say, some 436 pieces, and it was a highly commended model in a worldwide competition some 20 odd years ago with the International Society of Meccano. That's it.
I'm standing in for Richard Seeley, who is an advanced collector of Meccano aircraft. Meccano aircraft were developed by the Meccano company from about the 1930s through to the 40s, and they lasted about 10 to 15 years, after which they were never pursued again. And if we start off with some of the simpler sets, when they first put these sets out, they had flat wings, they didn't have any cambers on them, and the parts were fairly simple, just straight pressed out of metal, no fancy covers for the wheels, ordinary struts for the wings, and again flat, basically flat tapered wings, no other moving parts on them. As they developed, they got into some more fancier adaptations. They got special little covers to make them look like proper wing cowlings, engine cowlings, and they got aircraft floats, none of which are in the very, very early sets. And as well as these sets, these are the number 2 outfits. Well, sorry, I make a mistake, they're the number 1 outfits. The number 0 outfits were a smaller model of a similar type of thing. They were made with almost the body pressed in one piece and the base pressed in one piece. And these were a simpler type of toy, highly sought after, I might add, by collectors these days. They came in a monoplane or a biplane. They came in various colours, as you can see here. Mixtures right through to an army camouflage colour, straight silver paints. And these were obviously made for military use because of the roundels on the wings. And in the bigger sets, the roundels were removable. And in different countries, the roundels were different. Like you had German roundels, you had Swiss, you had Dutch. Any country, I think there was about 30 countries in the world represented by the different roundels you could get on the sets. So these things were sold worldwide. This is an example of one of the boxes that they came in. So you can see another example of nice litho printing to attract the eye. And the sets were laid out similar to the standard Meccano sets. As we got more advanced, the sets became more advanced. We got cambered wings like the real aircraft would have. We got engine mountings, slightly more advanced. They clipped onto these cowlings, slightly bigger, and even more advanced still were the special sets where they had the flaps were able to move up and down, and you notice they were joined by a wire, so you move the top one, the bottom one would move. Same with the tail. All these flaps were movable, so much more advanced. The motors were more advanced. This is an example of the motor housing and a realistic rotary engine inside with a cowling on the outside, and these fastened of course onto the struts. So it gave all in all a more realistic looking motor. Talking about motors, they were available in these sets as well. They put out a number 1 aero engine, and this would only fit in these aircraft. This one, when you wound it up, it went flat knacker once you let it go, and it wouldn't stop. This one here, this is the number 2 aero engine, a little bit more advanced. It had a controller in here so that you were able to push it out from the top of the aircraft and stop the propeller from spinning. And so rather than just winding it up and letting it go, you could stop it or start it at will with that little control rod. So they got more and more advanced as they went along. In Europe, they went into a ribbed finish, and this is an example of a European finish, and they tapered the wings, which none of the ones that were sold in the UK were, but in Europe these tapered wings came with the sets. He's also got an example of an advanced set here, and you can see some of the special bits in here. Like these are the special cowlings for the engine, a special cab which fitted over the front and made the thing look more like a cabin liner. So as soon as you put that on, it looks like that, take it off, it's an open cockpit. So very, very clever little designs. A lot of other people emulated the same designs. This is a Dux Aero Constructor set, put out in Europe about the same time. And there were many, many others. In France they had Meccano, which is a similar brand. Lots of them were doing the same sorts of things. These spats were to cover the wheels. They were a slightly more advanced model than the earlier ones, which were just straight like this. So as they went along, they developed more and more. Okay guys, so that sort of covers our range of the models for the exhibition in 2013. So we hope you've all enjoyed it. It's been a great exercise for us all, and we thank you all for your participation, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.